to discuss various topics or issues in education by inviting experts on their respective field from the faculty members here at Triple IU or colleagues from different institutions. As today, we have our colleagues from the University of Canberra. This is a 20th lunch talk that was conducted by the Faculty of Education, and we are pleased to have Professor Barney Dalgarno today that going to share his speech today with all of you here. It's going to be a good insight for all of us, especially those who are work in the education field. So University of Canberra, the title of his speech will be University of Canberra's Innovative Educational Partnership Model and its relevance for Indonesia's teaching landscape. So we're going to hear from Professor Barney, but before that, because we have our guests and we have our new profile of Faculty of Education, so we would like to see and watch together the video profile of the Faculty of Education, Triple IU. So for the IT team, is it possible to play it now? Yeah, so you want to use my laptop or use your laptop first? Yeah. Okay, so yeah, so maybe we can stop the PowerPoint first. So please give us a few seconds to fix the technical glitch. So we want everyone to see this video. I think it's really nice to know the picturing about our uni.
Welcome to Indonesian. Welcome to Indonesian International Islamic University, a university that stands together in a diversity of cultures, languages, history, and also the beliefs inherent in the identity of Indonesia as a multicultural archipelagic country. Indonesian International Islamic University is the first international Islamic university in Indonesia that not only explores Islamic studies, but also introduces to the world an advanced Islamic civilization in Indonesia that's able to make a positive contribution through discovery, research, and global achievement. High quality of international education right here in Indonesia, but this is the Indonesian International University, or Triple IU. Triple IU has four faculties. One of them is the Faculty of Education. The Faculty of Education offers MA and PhD education with full concentration. So before teaching and learning. Second, educational assessment and evaluation. Third, education policy, management and leadership. And four, education and society. The four institutions are designed to represent the ecological system, namely those that focus on the micro context, represented by concentration of curriculum, teaching and learning, the meso context, represented by the concentration of educational assessment and evaluation, and the concentration of education policy, management, and leadership, while the concentration education and society represent the context of the larger national layer, bringing it with the macrolenses, economics, politics, anthropology, and sociology of education. And here, we are at the Faculty of Education, one of the faculty at IIIU designed to produce high-quality transformative educators with a passion for lifelong learning. Dedication to excellence and innovation sets us apart from the rest, and we are proud to be leading the way toward a brighter future for education.
The IIIU Faculty of Education offers a Master of Arts in Education program that prepares graduates for careers as academics, practitioners, designers, researchers, government officials, managers, supervisors, assessment specialists, evaluators, policy analysts, and consultants at national and international institutions. The program provides a comprehensive foundation in education covering theories, philosophies, practices, and their connection to society and culture. Graduates are equipped with skill and knowledge necessary to succeed in education. The IIIU Faculty of Education is committed to providing students with a supportive and inclusive community. Our faculty comprises experts dedicated to helping students achieve their academic and professional goals. With resources and support available at IIIU, students have the opportunity to thrive and succeed in their chosen careers in the education sector.
The Faculty of Education is filled with experts and globally recognized lecturers who are able to share their passion, story, journey, and perspective with like-minded students.
Our PhD program is designed for students who are passionate about education and want to make a significant contribution to the field. Our faculty members are experts in their respective areas of research, and our program provides students with the analytical tools and resources they need to conduct groundbreaking research and participate in global discussion. Our application process is highly competitive, but we encourage all qualified students to apply. You can visit our website for more information on the application requirements and deadlines. Let's make your dream come true with study in the PhD program at the Faculty of Education, Universitas Islam International Indonesia.
The Faculty of Education at Indonesian International Islamic University is designed to produce scholars, researchers, and experts in education who understand the scientific foundation of education holistically, with a comparative insight into the philosophy and the practice of Western, Islamic, and Indonesian education. Students at the Faculty of Education are encouraged to explore complex educational problems and come up with innovative solutions.
On more than 140 hectares of land, Indonesian International Islamic University has built dozens of facilities to ensure a seamless experience and also a balance between academic activities and non-academic activities. Indonesian International Islamic University will always support the positive development and freedom of each individual, especially those related to physical, mental, and spiritual development.
One of the reasons to establish this university is how to introduce English to the world. Indonesia is a very rich country in terms of cultural diversity, religious diversity, and also experiences in developing democracy hand in hand with the Islamic development.
Instead of sending study abroad to many foreign countries, now we invite students lecturer in lecture in Indonesia, and this university become an intellectual hub. And I'm sure within a short time, Indonesia will get global recognition. Since we have qualified lecturer, qualified student, and we have a clear plan how to make this university getting international standards.
At IIIU, we will learn more, gain more, and get even more as we believe. Lesson shapes souls. Come and join us to shape the souls and create the future.
All right, so next, we will hear the welcoming remark from the Dean of the Faculty of Education. To Professor Nina Nubila, the time is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Destina. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. First, I would like to welcome Professor Barney Dalgarno, PhD, the Executive Dean of the Faculty of Education at the University of Canberra. It's very nice to see you, Professor Barney. And then Dr. Siti Maisuri Batamuddin, the Associate Professor at the Faculty of Education too. Actually, I have known Dr. Siti Batamuddin like about 2 years ago in the meeting of the what's this the forum tingkat dunia, what is that forum diskusi akademisi Indonesia tingkat dunia, whatever it is, yeah. That's for what's that Indonesian academician all over the world, yeah, meeting together during the seminars. And I'm very glad that during your visit, you have the time to come here at IIIU, even though it is like a bit 1 hour from Jakarta. So thank you very much. And Professor Barney will talk about the University of Canberra's unique affiliated schools partnership. And that's very important and timely. And today we just finished our museum. This means that batch 1 of the MA in education just finished their studies, and they're going to have graduation ceremony this Tuesday. And you might have please communicate with both of them about the possibility, for example, continuing your studies, because now the Ministry of Religious Affairs gives scholarships, many scholarships, which is called Beasiswa Indonesia Bangkit. Yeah, so you can apply for that scholarship, and then possibility of continuing your studies at University of Canberra. I just read the message that when you come, you were in the judicium program, and being asked whether you would like to join. It's okay for you to join. Yes, actually, it is welcome. But when I read the message, the judicium program has already ended, and we have already been here. Yeah. And my apology that this lunch talk is in coincident with another meeting. It is like urgent but very short notice meeting from the Ministry of Religious Affairs this afternoon. So after opening the session, I would like to ask permission to go to my office again. And after the lunch talk, maybe after 15 minutes break, both of them will have a meeting with our lecturers at the faculty meeting room, and they already know about our faculty meeting rooms. But my apology again that my meeting with Mora, Minister of Religious Affairs, will end about 5:30 or 6 p.m. today, so I cannot join the meeting. But we will have Ibu Destina, Dr. Bambang, Dr. Tati, who will speak about the possibility of cooperation between these two universities, including the possibility if our graduates can continue PhD, for example, in the Faculty of Education at the University of Canberra, because there are, the scholarship for Indonesia Bangkit is there, so students can apply. Okay, without further ado, I would like to open the lunch talk of the 20th lunch talk because we began since January 2022, and it is a forum for us to share our expertise. So I would like to open our lunch talk today by reading Basmalah. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Hope everything run well, even though I expect more participants from batch one. Yeah, please contact them to join us. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Professor Mena.
Thank you very much, Professor Mila. Okay, so now we are coming to the main session today. We have Professor Bani Dargano going to share his thought with all of us. But before that, let me read a short bio of Professor Barney. So Professor Bani Dargano is Executive Dean of the Faculty of Education at the University of Canberra. He has gained international recognition for his research contribution over 25 years in the use of technology for learning, with specific foci in learning technology as an enabler of student engagement and success, adoption of learning technologies in higher education, and the affordances of polysynchronous and virtual learning environments. He has been awarded 7 national research grants totaling over $1 million and authored 7 books and 87 reported publications. So that is the short bio for Professor Barney. Very extensive experience as academia, and we are very grateful to have him here to share. And please use this time very well, dear students and all participants in the Zoom also. So without further ado, I give the time to Professor Barney. Professor Barney, the time is yours. We have around 30 minutes for presentation, and then we continue with question and answers.
Now, stand up. Thank you, Destina. And look, it's a great opportunity to be hosted here at YU. Today we've had a lovely tour of the campus, and it's a really exciting to be on a campus that is so new and a university that obviously has such a bright future. So look, I'm going to let me just. So what I'm going to do in this presentation is I'm going to tell you a little bit about the University of Canberra and the Faculty of Education. And then I'm going to just give you a little bit of extra context about teacher education and school education in Australia as a segue into talking about our University of Canberra affiliated schools partnership, which has been recognised as a sector-leading school partnership in Australia. And then I'm going to finish with a few insights in relation to Indonesian school-university partnerships. So look, starting with the University of Canberra, the first thing, of course, is to say Canberra is the capital of Australia. I realised I was going to have a slide with a map here, but the Wi-Fi on the aeroplane yesterday didn't quite extend as far as giving me a map of Australia. But Canberra is, if you think of Sydney, which is on the east coast of Australia, Canberra's inland about 3 hours by car. So the University of Canberra is a relatively young university. We're 30 years old. Our predecessor institution existed for about 20 years prior to that. So that's that puts us as one of the younger universities in the world. And of those young universities, we have a number of measures which suggest that we are very much on the rise amongst a number of indicators. So one of the world's top 20 young universities, and one of the fastest rising universities in the world. Our purpose statement in our new strategic plan is together we work to empower, connect and share knowledge with our people, cultures and places. And we draw on an Indigenous word, Galambani, which encompasses some of that. One of the things that's particularly distinctive about the University of Canberra is our very strong emphasis on professional education and contribution to the professions in our research. And it's quite noteworthy that within the Australian Capital Territory, where Canberra is located, we train the large proportion of almost all of our major professions. And of course, my interest is in teacher education, and we train at least 78% of Canberra's teachers. Our research is also very much on the rise. We have at least 250 research projects within the university currently active, and about $10 million each year in research funding over the last few years, with a large $20 million of funding in 2019. We have research outcomes reaching the nation and the world. We research across a wide range of disciplines, and many of those disciplines have been rated as meeting or exceeding world standards, including education as one of the top research disciplines within the University of Canberra. Our values are also a distinctive feature for us. The first value, Narragaana Wali, is a Ngunnawal word meaning alive, well-being, coming together, and peace. We also, within our values, talk about walking together. Everyone's invited, dare to be curious and change the world. So values kind of encompass a culture of inclusion, of diversity, of engagement with community, and of research that finds new knowledge and makes a difference to the world. Now, the Faculty of Education has distinctiveness in its applied and experiential education programs underpinned by deep partnerships and high impact research. And I want to just unpack each of the components of that overarching purpose statement. So our educational programs contain more teaching practice and more diverse school experiences than any other provider in Australia. So we really believe strongly that if you're training to be a teacher, you need to be regularly engaging with experienced teachers around the practice of teaching, as well as learning about theories of child development, theories of learning, and theories of pedagogy applied to your particular discipline based on the latest research. So that mix of research and applied practice in schools is something that we are very well known for in Australia. Our partnerships are also a key point of distinction. Our applied programs are enabled through long-standing and deep partnerships with schools, school systems, and early learning providers in the early childhood setting. The right-hand side of this slide here is an extract from one of a number of recent review documents from our Commonwealth Government, which have made a note that our affiliated schools partnership in particular is a sector-leading partnership. And I will be talking in a bit more detail shortly about some of the elements of that partnership and why it's so distinctive. Our research partnerships with government, school systems and industry have enabled us to undertake large programs of collaborative research, having positive impacts on educational policy, teaching practice and sustainable communities in Australia and throughout the Asia Pacific region. And you can see just one of our international partnerships is in Indonesia, but we could put a dozen photos like this of ourselves engaging with other people in other countries around the Asia Pacific region. So we really are connected in our research. What matters to us as a faculty? We have a real passion for equity of opportunity, We believe really strongly in evidence-based teaching. We care about environmental sustainability, and we believe that First Nations knowledge, in particular our Australian First Nations people who are one of the oldest living cultures on the planet, have a lot to tell us about sustainably living on this planet. So switching gears now to say a little bit about teacher education in Australia, just to understand, I guess, the context in which we're working in Australia so that we can look at the similarities and contrast it with the characteristics of the Indonesian education system. So I'm going to say a little bit about Australian schooling, about the career of teachers, and then a little bit about teacher education, and then some of the kind of narratives, I guess, within our media about school education and teacher education, which are kind of having an impact on our expectations within that context. So school stages in Australia, so we begin in early childhood settings, birth to age 5, and typically a lot of parents will have their children in some kind of daycare while they're working for part of their time per week up until they commence preschool. Preschool is slightly more formal, and probably the majority of parents in Australia send their children to preschool at ages 3 and definitely at age 4. Then they commence primary school at age 5, where they stay for 7 years until the age of 12. Then they move to secondary school or high school. In Canberra, we have high schools that go from year 7 to year 10, ages 12 to 16, and then we have secondary colleges for year 11 and year 12, ages 16 to 18. Some parts of Australia and some independent schools in the ACT go away from year 7 to year 12, ages 12 to 18. So our primary school is like your elementary school. So I think the systems are somewhat similar between Indonesia and Australia in that breakdown of the kinds of schooling. So just a little bit about the way that the schools day and year are structured. The school year starts towards the end of January, which is summer for us, and ends in mid-December. The year is made up of 4 10-week terms with 2-week holiday periods between each of the 4 main terms, and then a 6-week summer holiday over the December-January period. School tends to start around 9 a.m. and end around 3:30 p.m. each day. In primary school, students normally stay in the one classroom with one teacher for most of the day, and so that teacher is trained to teach all of the different subject areas: literacy, numeracy, and all of the social sciences, PE, science, etc., all in the one classroom. In secondary schools, students tend to have a different teacher for each subject and will move around the school for classes across the different subject areas each day. And I think in that respect, also similar to the Indonesian system. The Australian school curriculum is based on a national curriculum. However, there's a fair bit of variation in the way that it's interpreted and taught. Some state jurisdictions elaborate upon that national curriculum and create their own state frameworks. Some non-government schools and school systems also use a modified version of that national curriculum. So it's there, but it's not prescribed to the extent that every school has to teach exactly the same curriculum. So the curriculum is divided into learning areas: English, mathematics, science, health and physical education, humanities and social sciences, the arts, technologies and languages. It also covers some general capabilities across those different learning areas: literacy, numeracy, ICT literacy, and so on. And there's also some cross-curriculum priorities, which are kind of national priorities, which are expected to be taught within all schools: Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and cultures, for example, and Asia and Australia's engagement with Asia, along with sustainability. So the actual classroom organisation, I think, is worth mentioning because classroom organisations do tend to differ a lot across the globe. Typically in Australia, you'll see a lot of secondary classrooms arranged in this kind of a way with the U shape. You'll also see secondary classrooms in kind of rows, but usually with a cluster of desks. You rarely see a classroom in Australia where every child is sitting at an individual desk in rows. I know that, for example, in China, that's a very common arrangement of a classroom. In Indonesia, probably a bit of variability as well. You do, yeah. There's a mix of direct instruction and inquiry learning, whole class and small group discussions, individual and group activities across the different school systems and the different classrooms. Inclusion of students with a disability or special needs into mainstream classrooms is very common in Australia, and only students with very severe special needs will tend to be taught in a specialist school. So some of the kind of current issues that which are either challenges or noteworthy issues that are mentioned in the media in relation to school education in Australia. Probably the number one is a real shortage of teachers. So in Australia, we all of the teacher education providers, such as the University of Canberra, are working really hard to promote teaching as a career. But there are a range of reasons why the number of people taking up a new degree as a teacher has not kept pace with the growth in the Australian population. And so we're increasingly having a shortage of teachers, and it's most pronounced in rural areas of Australia, in disadvantaged schools with disadvantaged socioeconomic status, and also in particular secondary areas, particularly maths, science, languages, and technology. The COVID disruptions that we saw in Australia through lockdowns and teacher absences has really had an impact on student behaviour and on teacher wellbeing. And I think a lot of schools in Australia are still recovering from the jolt of the COVID experience. And so we're seeing bigger problems with student behaviour and teacher wellbeing now than we saw before COVID. The shortage of experienced staff in schools is impacting on the mentorship of pre-service teachers, people training to be teachers when they're on placement, but also on mentorship of new teachers. So that again is creating challenges in the school situation where there just isn't the volume of settled experienced teachers to help support new teachers. The inclusion of students with special needs in mainstream classes and the kind of increased incidence of things like autism spectrum disorder and other neurodiverse characteristics, such as attention deficit disorder and so on, is really led to classroom management challenges for teachers. And so we're seeing a lot of behaviour issues in class, which is then impacting on other children's learning. And the Commonwealth Government commissioned a working group to develop an action plan stemming from a roundtable on teacher workforce to try and address some of these issues. But really, the shortage of teachers then is having a kind of an impact on all of those other issues as well. So it's making it very hard to address some of those challenges. So a little bit about initial teacher education, pre-service teacher education. Entry-level teacher qualifications are usually completed at the undergraduate or they can be done at the postgraduate level. So for students finishing school and going straight into teaching, they'll normally do a Bachelor of Education, either in primary teaching or secondary teaching or early childhood teaching. Alternatively, a lot of teachers will do a degree in something else, such as a Bachelor of Arts or a Bachelor of Science, a Bachelor of Business or Law, and they might work for a number of years in the workforce before making a decision to change careers into teaching. And they'll do a postgraduate degree, such as a Master of Primary Teaching or a Master of Secondary Teaching. All initial teacher education programs in Australia are accredited by a state-based teacher regulatory authority that is interpreting some national standards of the Australian Institute of Teaching and School Leadership. So typically, as a teacher education provider, we have 5-year accreditation cycles where we have to demonstrate that our courses meet those national standards. And I understand from Justina that you, of course, are also having to accredit your programs here at IIIU to meet particular government requirements as a new university. We have to do that as a university as a whole. And then with particular courses that are accredited by the Specialist Accreditation Agency, in this case, the state, for us, it's the ACT Teacher Quality Institute that accredit teaching programs. Oh, I meant to also mention that as well as teachers having to graduate from a program that is demonstrated to meet those national standards, the students themselves have to complete a national literacy and numeracy test called LANTIDE, and they also have to complete a teacher performance assessment in their final year in order to be registered as a teacher and graduate from a program. So the Australian professional standards for teachers define the standards that a teacher needs to meet in order to graduate. Then it also defines what teachers need to do after 2 or 3 years of being a teacher to become recognised as a fully qualified teacher. And then there's also a highly accomplished teacher standard that you can acquire after many years of experience. So just some of the issues in teacher education that are kind of really important within our Australian context. One of the challenges in Australia is that in schools, Australia hasn't been performing as well as comparative nations in international literacy, numeracy and science tests. And some of our politicians have decided to blame teacher educators for this. So what we're seeing is quite a lot of government attention on teacher education, where the government has tried to hone in on how we're preparing future teachers, in the hope that by making improvements there, we'll also see improvements eventually to Australia's performance in some of those comparative international tests. The first of those reviews was the Quality Initial Teacher Education Review, commissioned by the Commonwealth Government, which made recommendations relating to attraction and selection of teachers, the quality of initial teacher education programs, and also around supporting new teachers in their early years. There's also been a report from an expert panel around implementing that recently. So that's just a bit about our context. Now, switching to talking a little bit about our affiliated schools program. So I really want to kind of talk in a little bit of detail there. So the affiliated schools partnership, the collaborative partnership between the University of Canberra and the ACT Education Directorate, and it encompasses 26 schools. The partnership is funded with $2 million per year from the ACT government, 2 million Australian dollars, which no, my head can't do that calculation quickly to tell you. 20 billion rupiah. So it's quite a well-funded program, and that some of that funding goes to schools and some goes to the university. It's founded in a shared commitment to high quality education and draws on leading practice contextualized in the ACT setting. So the elements of the partnership, they're multifaceted. So firstly, there's work integrated learning for pre-service teachers. And I'll say a little bit more in a moment about some of the different kinds of ways in which our education students engage with schools as part of that partnership. There's professional learning and postgraduate study for in-service teachers. So there's a number of different ways in which we're developing the capacities of working teachers and also providing them with opportunities to go on and complete a master's. And there's collaborative research and scholarship. So let me just talk about each of those. Firstly, work integrated learning. So the really distinctive part of our students' engagement with schools at the University of Canberra is our clinical model, which is which we refer to as pedagogical content knowledge clinics. Now, these clinics involve students actually undertaking units of study in a school environment, and every week getting the opportunity to practice the particular practices that they're learning in those units. So in addition to those clinics, the students also carry out extended teaching placements and observation placements. Most universities in Australia have those observation placements early in the degree, and then the extended teaching placements, maybe 2 or 3 of those placements in the degree, where students spend a few weeks in a school teamed up with the teacher. But very few have the clinical units that we have, which complement those block placements. So just to go into a little bit more detail about that clinical model. So I think there's 8 of these units, 7 units within our primary ed program in each of the different areas. So there's a PCK maths, PCK science, PCK English, etc. Pedagogical content knowledge comes from Schulman, and in simple terms, focuses on the content area specific pedagogy that a teacher needs. What are the pedagogical techniques that a teacher needs to teach science? And then the PCK English, what are the pedagogical techniques a student needs to teach English? So they'll have a semester of study with a 3-hour workshop each week. And in those 3 hours, which are held in a school, the first hour will be in a school classroom in a conventional way with an academic and the students, learning the pedagogy of that particular discipline area. In the second hour, students will work in a small group of students with a group of school students delivering small lessons which they've prepared in advance and supported by the UC academic and the classroom teacher as part of that practice. And I think that's quite a significant point, because if you read a lot of the literature on teacher education, what you'll often find is that students kind of develop this notion that there's 2 different worldviews. There's the academic view at the university, often very theoretical, often not grounded in recent experience in a school classroom. And then they'll go out on placement and the teacher will say, don't worry about that, that won't work. This is how we do it here. And so there's this real disconnect between what they're learning from their research-focused academics at university and from the practice-focused teachers in the school. So the really important feature of the clinical model is that you're actually bringing together those 2 worldviews at once. And so if the academic is saying, I saw you were doing, such and such and such, I can see that's an example of, Vygotsky's view of scaffolding, that's excellent. And the teacher will say, the teacher hears that and then can respond and point out some practical things that the student can do, make their own comments about the theory and bring those 2 worldviews together. So it's a really important thing that is rare in teacher education programs, because even when they're on placement, their academics aren't there. And there are few opportunities for experienced teachers to come together with academics and actually compare notes on the theory and on the research and on evolutions in practice. And then in the 3rd hour, the students have guided reflection on their lesson with the UC academic and often the classroom teacher present as well. So again, there's that opportunity to kind of reflect on what worked, what they could do differently next time from both the academic and the teacher perspectives. So the second piece of the partnership I wanted to talk about is professional learning and postgraduate studies. So we run a lot of workshops on mentorship for pre-service teachers and also mentorship for early career teachers. We run masterclasses on particular research-driven educational topics so that we can kind of disseminate findings from our research. We run a program called a Teacher as Researcher program in those affiliated schools, where a group of teachers will come together to work on a school improvement project, but from an action research framework. And so they will have an academic from University of Canberra working closely with them, guiding them on action research methods for evaluation, and really kind of facilitating those action research projects. And we see those as a really important developmental piece for training teachers in using research methods in their own evaluation of practice and in analysing the literature to inform their practice. What we see, you'll see in a minute when I talk about the research, that those capabilities are then picked up as part of collaborative research projects. And then we also have scholarships every year for teachers to undertake a master's degree. So the collaborative research and scholarship is the third piece I want to pick up. And so part of that 2 million a year is 500,000 Australian dollars per year for affiliated schools research program. So that's projects co-led by teachers and academics. So the first thing that you have to demonstrate when you put an application for this funding is that the project has both academics from the faculty and teachers from the school as co-leaders of the project. So we guarantee that research not only is important from the perspective of generating new knowledge, but is actually important in terms of aligning with the needs of schools in the ACT. Another thing that has to be demonstrated in the application is that the topic of the research aligns with the ACT government's future of education strategy. So it's a really good example of the kind of collaborative research that's actually leading to changes within the school system. And then the second part is the Teacher as Researchers program, which I mentioned before. And we're starting to, the first few years, we saw most of the projects initiated by academics who would then reach out to schools to find a school who wanted to partner on the project. But we're gradually seeing schools, because of them developing, they're doing their master's degree, they're developing some research capability as part of the master's, they're doing the Teacher as Researchers program, and more schools are putting their hand up and saying, actually, this is the research that we need to undertake, and seeking academics who can partner with them to undertake that research. So I want to just finish by just talking a little bit about potential parallels between our affiliated schools partnership and the Indonesian context. And here I'm drawing on my contribution from my colleague Siti, who's done a lot of research in the Indonesian context. So I'm certainly no expert, but my understanding is that some of the common trends, diverse learning needs, evolving pedagogical approaches, a focus on practical and applicable learning, and striving for improvement in educational outcomes against international benchmarks. So these are all things that we share. So we see the affiliated schools program as potentially a valuable source of inspiration for Indonesia. So the notion that improving the quality of education by fostering strong collaboration between universities and schools, which I think a lot of people pay lip service to, a lot of people talk about it and agree that it's important, but it requires many years of close collaboration to really start to achieve the scale of partnership that we're seeing. And what I've seen in my experience in Australia is that a lot of universities will go part of the way towards establishing partnerships with schools. Schools will go part of the way to the university, but often the logistics of matching school timetables and university timetables, the challenges of finding the sweet spot in research that is interesting to academics needs to be done in schools. And all of the kind of cultural differences between schools and universities often get in the way, and you'll see partnerships start off really bold, but then peter out over a couple of years. I think what the affiliated schools program demonstrates that if you stay the course, you can actually address some of those early challenges and you can achieve really outstanding outcomes. An emphasis on collaborative research and teacher professional development and teacher education models that bridge that gap between research-driven theory and evidence-based practice. And I saw a few nods around the table when I was mentioning that kind of two worldviews. So I'm kind of certainly feeling as though that's not a problem that's unique to Australia. So why does all of this matter for Indonesia? Benefits of adopting a partnership model like the Affiliated Schools Partnership are multifaceted for Indonesian education society. UC's Affiliated Schools program as could be a blueprint for educational partnerships in Indonesia. Firstly, it offers a holistic approach that bridges the gap between theoretical knowledge and practical implementation, aligning with Indonesia's efforts to provide relevant and effective education. Secondly, by promoting research collaboration, the model enables Indonesian educators to stay up to date with the latest pedagogical advancements and teaching methodologies. And I feel like so many people who, get passionate about evidence-based practice and research-driven teachers, and when they're doing their teacher training, when they get into the hustle and bustle of schools, that becomes a distant memory. So these kinds of partnerships that can keep educators up to date with the latest research advancements are really important. And thirdly, the emphasis on teacher professional development aligns with Indonesians' goal of nurturing highly skilled educators who can adapt to the evolving educational landscape. So look, it's a bit of a snapshot. I've tried to give you a bit of insights into the Australian context. I've tried to give you enough information about our affiliated schools partnership to give you a bit of a flavour. And I'm hoping that I've given you a bit of a sense for how these kinds of partnerships could be useful in another context, such as the Indonesian context. And I think we've got plenty of time for questions and comments.
Thank you very much, Barney, for the speech. Okay, so everyone already have the ideas about how University of Canberra models and have affiliated with schools and how they really focusing in the teacher training focus on, and really famous for that, University of Canberra. And before we come to the question and answer, maybe I want to give a little bit of clarification for maybe the system of education in Indonesia and Australia are pretty similar, even though not quite exactly the same, Barney. So we have the level for college school in Australia, maybe in Indonesia we call it high school. So we have grade 1 to 6 called elementary, and then 7 to 10, 7 to 9 we call it junior high, and we have 8 to 12 we call it as 10 to 12 we call it as high school. So in Australia we have college for 2 years and high school for 4 years, and we have 3.
So a bit like the American middle school sort of model.
Yeah, we have that one. So we have somewhat a little bit different, and also our academic year is somewhat different. I found often that my Indonesian colleague, when they have their kids coming to Australia, they get a little bit of headache because we start here in July, I think July, August for the beginning of the semester. And in Australia, it's really starting of the year. So January up to December. So that's somewhat different. I think it happened because my mom told me this. I didn't read it from the history. Actually, Indonesia start with January to December. Then we have a revolution in where the Communist Party has like a bad event like back then. So at that time, the government is rapidly in chaos. So at that time, then school stop at all and then start again in July, August. So that's the story. I'm talking about the story a little bit. Okay, so now I open for all the audience. If you have any questions or anything in mind or comments from what Professor Barney delivered just now, please. Yes, Ma'ruf. Um,
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, Professor. My name is Maruf Aman. I'm from Pakistan, currently pursuing my MA education at IIU. So I've got first questions, and both of them are related with education and AI. So you talked about disruption of COVID-19. You slightly touched on that to education sector. The first question is, so what you have a fixed model over there in Australia, and you must be aware of so many models like that, education models in other countries as well. So after like COVID came and it somehow brought disruptions to the education sector. After this whole way of AI, what disruptions did AI bring to your model or any other model in the education sector? Or what interference positively it brought? This is the first question. In your experience, what is interference positively or disruption that AI brought in the education sector, whether it's your model or education sector in general? This leads me to the second question, which is, you have a model, Australian one, and then you think that this can fit in the Indonesian model and solve its current some problems or upgrade it. This is the thing. Now, from my experience with AI, there are API GPT-4 keys which can be used to build GPT-4 models for any specific purpose. Do you think it was your capability to come up with this presentation in which you thought that your model can fit in Indonesian model? But do you think we can use API key to build GPT-4 model, which does the same work which actually you did, in which we tell GPT, it's our own model created by us using GPT-4 API. We tell it that, okay, we have this Australian or Pakistani or Indonesian model, and this is the country, and we would like you to tell us whether this model can fit in that country or not. Do you think AI has that capability and we can really execute such a model by creating it? Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's a great question. So, the first question around what's been the impact of AI on education in Australia, I think it's really early days yet. I think what we're seeing is the very first wave of work in trying to ensure the integrity of assessment. We're seeing it in universities and in schools where, of course, students are figuring out how to use tools like ChatGPT and the others to generate the outcomes of their assessment tasks, and teachers are playing catch up to try and figure out how to detect whether a piece of work has been the student's work or the work of an AI. And then secondly, to think about different ways of designing assessment that perhaps will be harder for a student to use an AI to develop. But really, I think the impact of AI on education is going to be absolutely phenomenal. I mean, I think the impact of COVID was we learned how to use our current pedagogical approaches generally to deliver lessons over video conference. It wasn't particularly striking. We saw some teachers adopt student-centered learning kind of approaches where they use different kinds of digital technologies to support that. But we've seen a real kind of switch back after COVID, not too many lasting changes. I think AI will have a much greater lasting impact on education, and I think it makes your head hurt to think about it. So your other question, could an AI have done this presentation, or could an AI have done a better job of thinking about models for school partnerships in Indonesia? Definitely. I don't know how many people here have experimented with a task that you need to undertake and seeing what would happen if you asked ChatGPT to do it. I had to do a short 4-page abstract for a talk I was doing in Germany. I'd already finished it. Just as an experiment, I gave ChatGPT the task of doing it. It was building on bunch of earlier research that I'd done and also some other frameworks of others. It did a pretty poor job first go, but when I explained its misinterpretation of some of my research, when I said, look, can you bring in this framework and this framework iteratively, it came up with something certainly plausible. I wasn't happy with it. I didn't use it, but it's clear as day to me that, and this was GPT-3, and 4, I understand, is significantly better. So the speed of development is such that it's quite scary for people that are involved in academic work or any kind of knowledge work, in fact, especially people like me that are somewhat late in career, and the things that I've kind of developed a reputation for. And it really worries me that that all of my reputational advantage could be out the window if a technology that's got access to every research paper in the world. I mean, I've read at 1/10 of a percentage of the research within any area that I'm an expert in. So how can I compete with an AI that's read every single one?
Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. I have a very specific question because you were talking about. My name is Abdul Baro and I am from the Gambia. I just completed my MA program at the Indonesian International Islamic University. My question is regarding teaching approach in primary schools. It's been some whereby teachers are trying to teach almost all the subjects at elementary level, from English to numeracy and English, which is almost similar context in the Gambia. Like a particular teacher will be asked to teach English, social studies, mathematics, science. And there was a debate sort of that sparked among the educators who believe this practice have a potential of undermining quality in education because teachers cannot be expert in all the areas that they are dealing with children. And there is a new wave that came whereby a rotational teaching, and teachers are asked to specialize on one particular subject and could rotate from primary 1, I'll be teaching English, primary 2, I'll be teaching English again in rotational manner. So this again, for the past 3-4 years, it has been happening, and then there was an assessment stuff through national assessment test to test the quality, but still very insignificant improvement have been realized at the moment. Based on your expertise as educator, which of the practices do you think is best suited or could be much more plausible for educators at elementary level, which we believe is foundation for education, school for students? And what would be your comment in terms of the Gambian context at this point? Thank you.
Look, I think from my experience and my knowledge of the research, I would say that the notion of focusing only on the content-specific pedagogical knowledge of the teacher as being of most importance in the elementary school, and therefore structuring the school in such a way that the child will hear from teachers who are expert in each of the different content areas, I think it kind of ignores the fact that it's actually the relational aspects of teaching that are so important in those early years of school. So a teacher that is able to understand the child, develop a relationship of trust with the child, and most importantly, is able to understand each child's special needs and use that knowledge of the special needs in the way that they provide specialist support to the children across the curriculum. I think that's what you lose if you move to a single teacher in each curriculum area. And I think that what you gain in sophisticated pedagogy, you're probably going to lose in your ability to actually relate to each child in a way that helps that individual child to learn. The I actually think that the common switch in a lot of school systems from the end of elementary school to the beginning of junior high school, where suddenly they go from one teacher to, 10 teachers a week, I feel like that is inappropriate, and there should actually be a gradual shift. And I've seen, some really good models where in those kind of middle school years, there's perhaps 3 or 4 teachers, and each of those teachers is teaching across maybe 3 different content areas, so that relational aspect of teaching and that ability to respond to special needs is kind of still a key part of the work in those early years of high school. And then in senior high school, where students are starting to get to those more advanced maths concepts, more advanced science concepts, and so on, then switching to that more specialist knowledge. That's my view, and doesn't surprise me that the results of the Gunnan experience were that there wasn't a significant improvement through that specialist content area specific pedagogical knowledge, but losing the relational kind of connection.
Okay, my name is Nuratika. I'm from Faculty of Education. First that, I would like to ask about teacher education because I was also from teachers major in my undergraduate. And when I see the presentation, what comes in my mind is the program is like having affiliated with school, which I think that I didn't have the experience in my undergraduate, but I remember that we as a student, when we finish our study in teachers majors, we haven't been approved as professionally, and we need to take 1 more year professional development, something like that. So is it similarly like what we have here in Indonesia with the teachers education in your explanation? Would you like to answer that? And my second question is, I heard that in Canberra or in Australia, if we study there, we will have additional. If we get this scholarship to study there, and our children will get a free study in the school there. Can you explain about that? Because I also get the information it's only applied in ACT area, or is it applied in all Australia area?
Let me give the microphone to City to answer the second question, and then I'll go back and answer the first question.
I don't know for every ACT, for every state, but what I do understand from Queensland state, the school was free for researchers, for PhD students, funded by and master by research, particularly funded by Australia Award. For ACT in the last 10 years, all PhD students and all master by research, they've got this special, service or benefits for their children. They can study for free from primary school to senior high school. Yeah, to senior high school. So when if for people who don't study PhD or master by research, the school is very expensive compared to general schools in Indonesia. Maybe I can also touch the first one based on my experiences comparing Indonesian and Australia, if you want. So I was educated to be a teacher in Indonesia and to be a teacher educator in Indonesia. All right, but my PhD was in Australia, and I was very fortunate to got an approval to do my PhD research. I did an ethnographic intervention at school. So I spent my research time about 1 year at school. So, but in Queensland. And then I became a teacher educator in ACT. So I have to learn so many things. And it is totally different from the system that where I was taught and where I taught, because I was a teacher educator in Indonesia for about more than 10 years before I moved to Australia. So the system is so different. So when I did, even though my previous dean helped me a lot to, to learn smoothly, but there are so many things to learn, but I really love the system. So I convened one unit called PCK in mathematics. All right, PCK in mathematics. So we had only one meeting at a time, one session at the University of Canberra, and the rest session was at school. And it's such an interesting unit because the session was 3 hours. The first hour was a workshop. We learned about, for me, how to teach mathematics meaningfully, how to teach mathematics for understanding. For example, teaching algebra or fraction, numbers, geometry. And then we prepare our student teach. It's a clinical teaching where we organize our teacher, our pre-service teachers to work closely with a group of students. So it depends on the school. Some schools provide us like even 10 students for one of my pre-service teacher, or sometimes they work only for 3 teachers. So it is like in Indonesia, in medical education, it is called koas. Yeah, it's like a very young doctor. So where the expert, the doctor accompany or mentor them to do it. So then after that, they had a session for 1 hour teaching. So that's where I walk around, I engage with my student, we look at it. And then the last 1 hour where we get together again in our workshop. Yeah, like we come back and we reflect what works, what worked, what didn't work, and we reflect and what is next. So the student, and what I noticed very much, what my pre-service students love at all is the teaching with the children. They really enjoy it, that kind of teaching. And at the same time, I really got benefits from that, because what happened in the classroom, I could capture some critical events. For example, some misconception, they were very clear, and that becomes a discussion point. So the connection between the theory and the practice was very powerful, and that's the benefits that I really, really find it very useful and very different. And I love that system as a part of the practices in Indonesia, because the common practices, we learn too much theory and we didn't, it's quite separate between the theory and the practice. All right, thank you.
I'm not sure that I actually answered, or City answered the the first part of your question, just in terms of, I think you said that in Indonesia, after finishing your study, you then spent a year in a school before you were fully qualified as a teacher. In Australia, we have something similar, but it's not quite going that fast. So within our Australian professional standards for teaching, the standards are defined at 3 different levels. So for each of the many standards, there's what you need to do to achieve graduate standard, efficient standard, and highly accomplished standard. So when a student finishes their degree, they're at graduate standard. At that point, they're able to be employed as a teacher on a permanent basis, on full salary. But within they've got 3 years to demonstrate that they've met proficient standard on all of those standards. Some do it in 18 months, 2 years, some take 3 years. And at that point, they can be kind of confirmed as a continuing teacher. But before they reach that standard, they are a fully qualified teacher and they can be paid a full salary. An interesting development, though, is that initially, as a response to teacher shortages during COVID, a lot of school systems in Australia have created a system where in a student's final year of their study, they're able to be employed as a conditionally accredited, or in the ACT, it's called under a permit to teach. They're not paid a full salary, but they are able to be responsible for a class. And so they haven't finished their degree. They're only 3 years into their 4-year degree, or in the case of Master of Teaching students who are doing it as a second degree, 1 year into their 2-year degree, they're able to be employed as a teacher. And I think what we haven't yet got right in Australia is structuring programs so that we take advantage of that final year, like the year you had after you finished your study, and actually have the university and the school working together to scaffold that kind of development. So I can imagine, for example, instead of having a university assignment where, develop a unit of work for year 11 on calculus, instead you say, develop a unit of work on high school mathematics relevant to your current teaching in your classroom as a teacher. And then the teacher actually develops a unit of work. They read the research literature on the pedagogy of maths and they write that into the assignment. And then they get feedback from the academics. So they're actually really using the fact that they're studying while working to really maximize their experience. We're not quite doing that yet. Long answer.
Thank you. How is it, Tika? Is it clear for you? All right. Is there any other question? Yoyon, please, can you help?
It's on the microphone.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity, Ibu Ristina. So one thing from your presentation that I noticed is you said that there is a lack of teachers in Australia, and that's why you kind of like somehow promoting teachers' profession to attract people to to choose teaching as a career. And if I compare to Indonesian context, I think it's kind of opposite because we have like a lot of teachers, and even like there was a notion from the government that they want to shut down some faculty of education at schools, things like that. So my question is, in the context of Australia, why do you think people see teaching not as like an option, a path to choose a career? And if for example, like Indonesian people wants to be teachers in Australia, what should they do despite, for example, like the Australian professional standards that you already have explained? Thank you very much.
So excellent question. In terms of what could Indonesian teachers who, if there's an oversupply in Indonesia, what could they do to get a job in Australia? Certainly, part of the action plan to address our teacher shortage has included trying to make it streamline that process for a qualified teacher from another country to come to Australia. We set really, really high English language standards, and I haven't done the IELTS test myself. I'm kind of frightened to do it because, but maybe at some stage I'm going to sit down and I'm going to say, okay, I want to get 5 politicians, 5 journalists, 5 PhD academics to all come and sit IELTS with me and see how we go. I bet you half of them won't get IELTS of 7 that we require of teachers from other countries, even though they may all be people that have grown up in Australia and been successful in their fields. So, you know, we haven't addressed that barrier, but I think some of the other barriers, I think we're improving the time delays in assessing applications and so on. But to your first question, why is it that it's not attractive? Well, I think one of the reasons it's not attractive is that the salaries tend to be a little lower than quite a lot of qualified professions. So, you know, they're certainly lower than engineering, lower than law, lower than a lot of more specialist health sciences like psychology and that kind of thing. So that tends to kind of lower the, you know, the status. I think the other thing though is that there's a cultural problem in Australia where there's not universal respect for teachers. And from students in classes and from parents in the community, we're not seeing the level of respect of teachers that we see in other countries. Probably countries like China, I think, is the complete other end of the spectrum where the respect for teachers is enormously high. But I think most countries have a higher level of respect for teachers than in Australia. And how that plays out is disrespectful behaviour from children in the classroom. So a lot of classrooms, particularly in poorer communities where children are maybe not kind of encouraged to take their education seriously by their parents, classrooms are really challenging for teachers. They spend a lot of time on behavioural management rather than on actually helping people to learn who want to learn. And I think that's putting off teachers. And then alongside that is, in a lot of communities, you'll get parents who will who will come into the classroom and criticise the teacher. I saw a lovely cartoon, actually. I can't remember where I saw it, but it was a couple of days ago. It was a cartoon showing 1950s in Australia. So a teacher with their child going along, a parent with their child going along to see the teacher, and the teacher's got, the child's report there, and the parent is yelling at the child saying, "Explain this D to me." And then they've got a picture of the parent with the child going to see the teacher in 2023. And instead, there's the child and there's the teacher, and the parent's going up to the teacher saying, "Explain this D to me." And I think that typifies that kind of respect to teachers that we're seeing in Australia.
Thank you.
Really?
Some uni, like teacher training institutions need to be shut down. We get equality and case that one of the students we have significant improvement. So that's why I think we have here we have lots of teachers graduating there. In Australia, there's shortage of teachers. So if some of Indonesian graduate with Australia, how it's like
Yeah, and you can tell from my answer, but I believe we should make it easier for internationally trained teachers to come to Australia. I mean, I see so many cultural benefits as well. So many Australian students have a narrow understanding of the world and its cultures. Very few Australian students study a foreign language at school. We've got this real kind of Western superiority attitude. And I just think if we could have more qualified teachers from other countries, then we would broaden the horizons of our children and of our population. But I'll keep working on our government on that.
We are in the process of renewing our MOU between the University of Canberra and Mora. So we have a very special agreement where we do not require IELTS 7 for IELTS, but we can attract them. They can apply for English preparation for 10 weeks at the University of Canberra to do this training for 10 weeks funded by the University of Canberra. But then at the end of the 10 weeks, they have to pass the test to be able to continue to the PhD level. But that was already a real benefit because studying English in the country is quite challenging. If you study in Australia, you don't have opportunity to speak Bahasa because everyone speaks English, and you can focus on that English learning. So we are in the process of renew or continue that agreement. Thank you. And that's only UC, University of Canberra, and one more university in Australia, only 2 universities. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Bu Destina. Thank you, Prof. Barney, for the presentation. So I just first I would like to share about my experience during my postgraduate study in Australia. Previously, I am a teacher 7 years in Lombok when I got scholarship study at Flinders, and then my lecturers bring me to this Australian school at Victor Harbour at the time. And then it's very struck me because the principal, which is my friend of mine in the class, showing to us, international student at the time, is that disability student inside the class. Seeing disability student is not something, it is something very rare to see that happen. So I asked my friend why this is happening, so that he said that this is the reality of life. So we cannot just isolate the disability student with the normal student. He said something like that. Right? So it is this a kind of culture shock for me, right? That's my experience regarding about your presentation about preparation of the teacher. So when I reflect back, I took 3 years diploma of teaching. Only in the last semesters, I just what you call as doing teaching practicum at school. It's already too late sometimes. We don't know what really happening. It's different story that you share to us. Is starting from beginning, the student have to know about school cultures, about what you call as the situation that they will face as teachers at school. Sometimes we just maybe too busy with so many courses to be taught to our students, and then we just forget to give a real experience dealing how school life will be like in the future. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think something we didn't mention, I guess, is just to me, the earlier you have some contact with schools during your study, the more you're able to kind of anchor what you're learning in your university classroom to that practice in schools. And there's still so many programs, teacher education programs in Australia, where they don't give the student a practical halfway through their second year. And the logic is, oh, well, you know, they don't know enough yet to be useful in the school. That's a year and a half of learning where the students just aren't imagining themselves as a teacher in a classroom. So they're going through all this learning about how to use this technique in the classroom or this theory or this, that, without imagining themselves as a teacher while they're doing it. I just think, yeah, it's exactly what you say.
The time is unfortunately need to stop us. Thank you very much, Professor Barney and also Dr. Siti Patahudin for coming to Triple IU and share with us. Thank you all the audience here at the campus and also through Zooms. So now let's end the session by saying Alhamdulillah. All right, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming to this session. Yeah. So can we have a like photo session for all? Yeah. Okay. And